Good morning, afternoon, or evening. I am Malcolm Hawker, head of data strategy with Prophecy Software and host of the CDO Matters podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining. Thank you for watching wherever you may be consuming the content, Apple, Google, Spotify, or on YouTube, or wherever, even the prophecy.com website. Thank you for listening in. Today, I am joined by my friend, and I can say that because I've known you long enough to qualify as a friend, I think.
I think so.
Thanks. I didn't want to be the only one who considers the other. Like, no, you're not my best friend. You're not my best friend. But anyway, Dan Everett. Dan, it's great to see you. Dan is the owner of Insightful Research. Yes, that is the name of your company.
Insightful Research. Yes.
Insightful Research. I've known Dan for, I think, almost 4 years, because I was trying to think the other day of when I met you, and it was more than likely we at least met on email, if not face-to-face, in late 2019 when I had joined Gartner and you were at Informatica.
Yes. And we came down to Austin and we went out to dinner.
Yes, that's true. So Informatica has had just opened a new office in Austin, in North Austin, and I do recall that it was like unseasonably cold when we met. So I think it may have actually been right around this time of year.
Yeah,
and I was getting to know the space, getting to know the people, and you were at Informatica, and that's when I first would have met, and then we interacted for the my entirety of almost 3 years at Gartner.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there was a time where you weren't involved with MDM at Gartner, right?
No,
when you were in Informatica.
I was there. I was talking to MDM, data governance. I think, that was one of the things where we really connected, was sort of like, data governance and MDM is like, chocolate and peanut butter, or peanut butter and jelly, or whatever analogy you want to use, right? You need both. So
peas and carrots.
Yeah, peas and carrots. I'm not a vegetable guy, you can tell. Chocolate and peanut butter and jelly.
Peas and carrots. Yeah. What was your role at Informatica? It was product marketing, right?
Yes, I was head of product marketing. So started out, I had data governance, data privacy, and MDM, and then towards the end there was just focused on MDM because it's just such a large part of the business and so core to, really data management, right? Those are your core business entities, and like those aren't right. Your processes don't work, and your analytics are wrong, and all the things that we talk about all the time.
Yeah, day in, day out, and increasingly so much so on LinkedIn. I was looking at your history, and I don't know if I knew this at the time, but you were at SAP for 10 years.
Yes.
So were you in the Bay Area the entire time? Because you as a resident of the Bay Area, is that where you were working for SAP?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in Palo Alto.
What did you do for them?
Started out, I was doing product marketing for small, mid-sized business solutions, but more focused on analytics and data management. And then went to the enterprise information management team, where I did data governance and MDM and CDO, all of those things.
So to make a long story short, Dan has a accomplished career in the data management space from a software perspective, and some of the things that I valued the most was at least from the perspective of being at Gartner when you were at Informatica. I always kind of viewed you as a voice of reason. Not to say that people aren't reasonable, but I always kind of viewed you as the voice of reason. And in our conversations, if I was being critical, you would kind of acknowledge, that may be somewhere where we could improve or not improve. But I really. In my time at Gartner, I had a wonderful time and I got to meet a lot of people, but my relationship with you was one that always kind of stood out because every time I got off the phone with you, I was like, okay, that guy's just so reasonable. He just sees both sides of the equation, and the things that he talks about make complete sense, and he's rational and his arguments are well formed. So there you go, Dan. That's
I appreciate that. I always try, a long time ago. I'm old, so a long
Join the
time
club,
ago.
brother.
Yeah, I read Stephen Covey's, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and one of them was, seek first to understand and then be understood. So I've always carried that with me for a long time. Like, and that doesn't mean I have to agree with somebody, right? But really trying to listen to their point of view and like, why do they have that point of view? What's their facts? What are their assumptions? What's their logic behind it? So that you can actually have a dialogue, right? I think that's okay. We're going to go on big topics here now, but I
Let's
think
do it.
that's
That's
one
what
of
we're
the
here for.
issue in our society right now is that we're so polarized around points of view that we can't even listen to the other side, right? To try and understand why do they hold that point of view, right? It's just like you hold that point of view and you're wrong. Mine is right, and you should come over to my side. As opposed to, it used to be we would have conversations about things, right? And then we could, if we understand where the other people are coming from, we can try and move, to some sort of like, yeah, this will work for everybody versus it's my way or the highway. I don't know.
See, I love it because, I've had to learn how to host a podcast. I think for anybody who's listening to me or listening to more than one episode, they're like, yeah, no kidding. And you still got a long way to go. Uh, um, uh, but I mean, I your words kind of struck me, not because there's broader societal issues at play here. And there most certainly are broader societal issues at play here that I think we need to be talking more about.
Mm-hmm.
I was born and raised in Canada. I spent my first 25 years in Canada, and I've spent the last 20 plus. That's all real gray hair there, people. In this country, and meaning the United States, and I had to kind of adjust to things here. And one of the things that was the most jarring,
Mm-hmm.
maybe for lack of a better word, was the kind of the kind of the binary nature of the left and the right,
Mm-hmm.
the conservative, liberal, red, blue, with me, against me, like this kind of this notion that you're either on the left or you're on the right. You're one
Right.
or the two, or you're
Right.
you're you're this or you're that. Because I was born and raised in at least under a political, kind of world where there's multiple parties, there's multiple points of view, there's multiple perspectives. There isn't just two.
Right.
There's any one given perspective has multiple points of view, and so there's that. And then the other thing that was normal for me growing up was, like you had a conversation about big lofty issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe politics or the state of the economy or
Right.
whatever. You'd have those conversations at dinner. It'd be
Right.
normal. And you'd
Right.
have them at family conversations. You'd have them at like Thanksgiving dinner, and you could walk away and have a heck of an argument, but you didn't want to, you didn't think less of the
Right.
person.
Right.
You
You're still my
didn't,
family afterwards.
but
I'm
that
not going
was
to disown you.
well, yeah. That may happen for different reasons. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, I found that to be different. But so when I get a chance to talk to people like you, maybe that's what it was, and maybe that's what it is, and maybe that's what I kind of saw was that there was some sort of chemical reaction in me saying, okay, well, this guy is reasonable, and he seeks to listen before speaking. Not because I wanted to bully the conversation, but I think that in and of itself is worthwhile. Like the idea of listening so you can hear versus listening so you can respond.
Right. Because that's the way the brain works, right? A lot of times, like
Ah.
if you watch your mind, the story your mind tells, right? Like somebody says something, and then you start thinking about, oh, I want to respond to that. And so the brain can only hold like maybe 5 to 7 concepts, the prefrontal cortex, the conscious thinking part. Um, so you hold on to that thing that you want to say, but then you miss everything else that the person is saying, right? Because you
What?
want to respond. Yeah, exactly.
Sorry,
Exactly.
what?
Yeah. Well,
I'm
it's
kidding.
not even,
I'm
it's
kidding.
not even what it's, well, when you said blah, blah, blah,
Yeah.
you're wrong because XYZ.
So this brings us to I mean, I guess the nexus, not the nexus or whatever. Like in your post informatica, uh, what's the world? What's the way to describe it? In your renaissance, perhaps?
Oh,
In
I
Dan
like
Everett,
that. I like
in
that.
your renaissance?
I've been telling people I'm semi-retired. My wife doesn't like that, but in my
Okay.
semi-retirement. But I like Renaissance man.
Renaissance is good. Dan
Yeah,
V2, right?
yeah,
Okay. In your Renaissance, let's go with that. A part of some of the things that you're focusing on, your tagline on LinkedIn is the techno optimist, which I
hmm
really enjoy. But some of the things that you've been obviously doing research on and spending a lot of time thinking about in your Renaissance are kind of a little different than what we usually do day in and day out in the data world. You gave a presentation at the CDO IQ conference in Boston earlier this summer that I attended. I was the guy in the back row doing the wave. Um, but where you kind of talked about some of these things like resistance to change and how
hmm
the brain processes thought. So I want to hear more about that. But what drove you that direction? So you're like a senior leader in a product marketing function talking about positioning and pricing and branding and creating narratives around data management and data management software. What drove that fork in the road?
Yeah. So that fork in the road came when I found out that my oldest son, had autism. So then that started a fork of like trying to understand how the brain works, how it processes information, um, and that's what started that fork. That would be 27, 27 years ago, so a long time. Um, but it was really a few years. The Randy Bean and New Vantage Partners. They've been doing their survey for, I think it's 8 years now,
Yep.
and I don't know, maybe 4, 5 years ago, a few years ago, right? Like the number one challenge is people and behavior and culture, right? And throughout the 8 years that they've been doing it, that's been the number one challenge,
Right.
right?
Yep.
Like by at least 80%. This year it went down a little bit because everybody's concerned about technology and LLMs and what do we do with generative AI. But like it's still like I think in this year's that's the technology part is 20% and people and behavior is still 80%, right? So like 4 times a bigger problem, right? But then you go and look at people's data strategy and like, I don't know, 1% maybe of the data strategy is around people and it's really mostly about like, how do we set up some processes and how do we train people? But it's nothing about like, what are the real reasons why people aren't changing, right? Because there's a psychology of change management. And that's really what I've been talking about is the psychology of change management. And I've been trying to think of some really, good, catchy phrase to call it, like brain literacy.
You're a product marketer, man. This is your
But
thing.
I know, but like, we've had this conversation before about data literacy. Like, you don't need data literacy. You need business literacy. You don't need a data strategy. You need a business strategy, right? So,
Yeah.
Adding one more thing, you need to know brain literacy.
Well, but
It
branding
makes me, yeah,
matters.
I'm just,
But
but
branding does matter.
right. But branding does matter.
Yeah.
But I'm a simple guy and I like to use simple words. And really it's about the psychology of change management. And
So so the fork
yeah,
on the one hand, going back almost 27 years,
yeah.
you've got this side hustle for that's a horrible way of describing it, but you've got this other passion of trying to figure out how things are working in your son's brain.
Mm-hmm.
And so you got that. And then you got your day job
Right.
of data management, data strategy, data culture, all of those other things. And so that's when things kind of came together post Informatica, Dan's Renaissance. Hey, let's put these things together. I think I've got something to share.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it sort of came together before that, but I mean, you know how it is when you're working a full-time job at a software company. There is no free time, right? So, those things were there, but now I've got the opportunity to sort of crystallize them more and, write about them uh, and those sorts of things. And I'm really enjoying it. And, people seem to be receptive to it. When I did it at Enterprise Data World earlier this year, I got the feedback from it, and it was like 4.8, and I think the average session was 4.5. So I feel good about that.
Good for you. I didn't
Yeah.
get any feedback from that session. So there you go.
That's because
Same.
MDM is dead. Long live MDM.
Okay, we could return to that because actually I think I like that topic. But by the way, because there's something about the psychology of killing things.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I don't know.
Right.
We seem to really want to kill MDM. I don't know why. But getting back to the psychology of change,
Sure.
your presentation put the psychology of change through the lens of kind of data culture or
Right.
culture.
Yeah.
Because I think it's true to say that most data leaders would say they need to change the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And to do that, I think what you would say is you need to change the people, quite obviously.
Right.
But what is it that makes us not want to change? Why do we dislike change, or why is change so hard?
Right. Right. So there are two separate information processing systems in the brain. So one is the prefrontal cortex, which is this very thin layer right on the front of your brain. So don't headbutt people. And so that's the sort of the logical evaluating part of the brain, right? Where we take facts and we look at them and we analyze them and we make decisions. And there's another part called the limbic system, and its sole purpose is survival. So within the limbic system, there's an area called the amygdala. So the amygdala is like this little machine learning algorithm, and its whole job is to resolve uncertainty as quickly as possible if something is a threat or not. And it uses generalization, assumption, and approximation to decide if something is a threat, right? So I'm at the watering hole, orange stripes, tiger, flee. It may or may not be a tiger, right? But from a survival perspective, I don't want to go, well, does it have fur? Does it have tail? Oh, look, it has fangs and claws. Oh, I'm lunch, right? So resolving uncertainty as quickly as possible is its whole job. So the brain hates uncertainty, right? And any kind of change is uncertainty. Change by default, we don't know, right? And brain science, there's been a lot in the last 15 years, a lot of research around this. An unknown outcome is more stressful than a known bad outcome.
So this is the rip the Band-Aid off.
Right, right. And it's so pervasive, and it operates on it has its own set of neural pathways. So it's like its own separate system, right? So it happens and you don't even realize that it's happening. So if somebody cuts you off in a car, you slam on the brakes, right? And you're not going, well, how fast am I going? How far is he from me, right? You just automatically slam on the brakes. And then you don't even think about it, right? You don't think about like, oh, well, how did I just do that? It just happened, right? And then you move on, and you're really not consciously aware of how the amygdala is making decisions for you. So yeah.
But as a leader,
Yeah.
can I override that? How do I reprogram that, or how do I at the very least mitigate that?
Right.
So I'm hired as a change agent,
Right.
right? And I'm supposed to be driving change.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a bunch of people whose fight or flight responses have been triggered because here's the new person who's brought in. That in and of itself, a new leader, right? Could be, whoa, was my job going to be okay? Everything going to be okay?
Exactly.
Right? Like, so already you may be in a semi-triggered state, as it were, for lack of a better word.
Right.
and I'm that new data leader. How do I work around that? How do I mitigate that?
Yeah. So, excuse me. The There tends to be, so there's been some research that shows that the the amygdala, it responds to social threats, and those social threats tend to be around status.
I'm going to lose my title.
Right, I'm going to lose my title. Autonomy, right? Like I'm not going to have control in how I do things, right? Relationships, we're splitting up teams and you're going into a new team. Well, I got all these relationships with people, and then fairness, right? Like, is the process fair? So those tend to be like big buckets where people get triggered. And so, and we respond to all of those. We get triggered by all of those, but some of them are more intense of a response for people than others. Like for me, relationships are a big trigger. So like when my wife and I get in a fight, like I want to go fix it. And for my wife, autonomy is a big trigger. So when I want to go fix it, she feels like I'm impinging on her autonomy. She's like, so it makes for a very interesting dynamic. But if you understand that, like, those tend to be the big buckets of triggers, right? Then you can think about, okay, if I'm going to go have a conversation, we're moving to a data products approach, right? And I'm going to go have a conversation with Malcolm, who's been building reports for his boss, right? Well, maybe there's probably a sense of status around that, right? Because the boss relies on you to build the reports, right? So instead of going and like, hey, I got this great news for you. You don't have to build those reports anymore, right? Which would probably trigger a threat response. It's like, first validate their status. Like, hey, you've done a great job in building those reports for your boss. Your organization is a top performer because of it. We're moving to this new data products approach. We'd like to take all the things that you've been doing, right, and provide more value with data and analytics to more people, right? So it's a different conversation. Now, that doesn't mean somebody won't get triggered, right? But if you're thinking about how might this be perceived as a threat to somebody's status or their autonomy, right, or their relationships or fairness, right, then that's how you start to mitigate some of these threats.
Well, I think you just described why the data mesh may be successful. You just appeal to people's autonomy, and you appeal to their sense of fairness and status. You get to build your own reports however you want to do it. Knock yourself out. You define what's fair. You define the governance policies, and you now get to kind of wear that anyway.
We're gonna go Wild Wild West.
No.
Wild Wild West of data mesh. Malcolm West and what was it? Jim West and what was the other guy? Artemis Gordon and Dan Gordon.
We're dating ourselves here.
No, Will Smith did a remake. People will know that.
Oh, okay, that's true. Will Smith did do a remake of the Wild West. That's correct. Let's assume that I am triggered, and my amygdala has gone berserk, and I'm freaked out, and I'm kind of in some sort of state of fight or flight.
Yeah.
Basically, every time I log in or go through the front door. What does that mean? Does that make me like am I am I unreceptive? Am I mutinous? Like what am I gonna do? Like am I gonna
it could be a broad range of things, right? It could be simply you're not engaged. Right? It could be you're passively resistant, like okay, yeah, sure, whatever, but then when nobody's looking, I'm gonna do whatever the F I want.
Right.
Or it could be actively like trying to sabotage, right? Like recruiting other people to join them and say, hey, this is unfair. And so I just saw this Gallup poll and they were saying that, I want to say it was like 65, 70% of employees are disengaged with work. And that disengagement equates to like 8 or $9 trillion, which is like 9% of global GDP. So it's a big issue.
So this is kind of like the quiet quitting thing, right?
Yeah, it is like the quiet quitting thing, right?
Like, I'm just going to do the absolute positive bare minimum and fly under the radar and do whatever I need to do. Hopefully I don't get fired. So let's assume, So as a CDO, I've been hired as a change agent. Sometimes CDOs are hired as operators, right? It's just put the shovel in the ground and build the reports, right? Sometimes that's true. But moreover, these days, you were expected to be a change agent.
Yeah.
And sounds to me like what you're saying is that as a part of the definition of a data strategy, or certainly the operationalizing of a data strategy, the operating model, the implementation of these three things that you talked about, right? The sense of status and fairness and equity would need to be deeply interwoven into how you actually implement. What does that, from a tactical perspective, what does that equal? Does that equal things like, a lot of town hall meetings? Does that equal like, regular newsletters? Like what like brass tacks tactically, what form would these things take as a part of the implementation of anything a CDO would be doing?
So it's a lot around the communication process. So one of the triggers is fairness. Now, in every organization, there are people that they don't have formal authority, but they're the people that the peers look up to and reference, right? To say, hey, I'm just going to keep.
Sorry, is that my dog or your dog?
No, that's my dog.
That's
my dog. Yeah.
Oh, it could be mine. I've got two of them that sound just like that. Okay.
Yes. So the dog doesn't think it's fair.
Where's my treat?
Right. No, but so in every organization, right, there are people they're not in formal authority, but they're the people that peers look up to and reference to, like, hey, is this fair or not?
Influencers,
right?
As it were.
Right. You're influencers, right? So you want to go find those people and you want to recruit them onto your side because they will help bring their peer group along. Right. So that's one strategy. In terms of autonomy, asking people for input, beforehand and really taking it into consideration is helpful because people feel like they have some ownership or skin in the game, right? If their input is taken. Now, you don't want to do that if you know that, Bain has already come in and done this big assessment and the CEO is in there in the town hall meeting, right? Telling us how we're going to roll this all out. And does anybody have any input? And everybody's going, yeah, right. People know, like, if you're just BSing them. So you clearly don't want to do that. But if you can give them the opportunity to provide some input, right, that's definitely going to help, right? And when Bain and those big guys come in, either people don't feel comfortable in really saying what they think, right? Or by the time all the input gets rolled up, things get lost, right? So people, on the street, the feet on the street, they have some great ideas on how to change things. But if you can't do that, can you give them freedom within a bounded context?
Right.
So, like, here's your context, right? And here's the resources that you have. Here's the people that you have. Here's the things you can't do. You can't do these things. But outside of that, you can use those people and the resources any way that you want to get the outcome that we're looking for, right? And then people, again, right, like, I have ownership. I have some ownership and some say, right? Yes, we're still making a change, right? And it's still having an impact. But can you give them some freedom in how they go and execute? So that's another strategy.
Love it. The one thing I would add, and this is kind of inferred with what you just said, but I want to be overt about it, which is what the subtext of what I just heard you say is that authenticity and sincerity from the leadership perspective has to be a part of the equation here, right? Like engaging people for their input. That can't be just a checkbox. That actually has to be sincere. You have to be authentic about that, and you have to take the feedback to the degree that you are within your boundaries to do so. Right? Quite obviously, you're not going to solicit. You may get feedback on your overall business strategy, but maybe you're unable to influence that because maybe it's coming directly from your board. So to the degree, for whatever scope you have, that needs to be that enterprise needs to be authentic, because people will see through that pretty quickly. If it's just a checkbox, right? Like I'm just here to give you ideas, and I know darn well that they're not going to get implemented, and you're not really been hearing me. I'm just here to check a box. Sounds like that's an important piece of the equation here, is to be authentic and be sincere about that enterprise.
Absolutely, right? I mean, that's what builds trust. I don't know if you've ever seen Simon Sinek. He's got this thing with the military, right? Of like, would you take the person that is the most skilled and proficient, right? But you don't trust him, versus the guy that's good enough, but I know in a fight he's got my back. I'm going to take the guy that's got my back every single time, right? I don't care how good that guy is. If he's not watching my back, no.
Love it. So let's go broader on culture, because I think we've got some real challenges, and I'd love your input. In a lot of the conversations I've had around culture, particularly when I was at Gartner, this is a common topic, by the way. I need to change the culture. I need to change the culture. This is a CDO, VP Data and Analytics, doesn't matter. I need to change the culture. And I'm feeling kind of, for lack of a better word, hamstrung by it, or maybe a victim to it, or I heard over and over again the idea that culture was something outside the data team, that it was culture was out there, and then I needed to change it. But what I saw that. And then what I also saw were behaviors within the data team that were completely contrary to the culture that the data leaders said that they wanted to promote. I'll give you an example. Being data driven. We could have an interesting academic discussion about what that actually means, and is it too pithy, and is it okay? Whatever, it doesn't matter. But I think we can all generally agree that the idea here is that you use data to make decisions, right? That you are making fact-based decisions, not intuition-driven decisions, right? Like, I think that's kind of high level, what most people would kind of say, yeah, that makes sense. That's really kind of what we're trying to get to here, is where it's not gut, it's not intuition, it's data, it's facts that we're using to make decisions about whatever. So you'd have a data leader brought on as a change agent, and saying, I need to change the culture. But then what I would see within data and analytics groups is not doing the same. Meaning you would ask, how much revenue is this change in your data function going to drive the organization? I don't know. How do you prioritize? Basically, it's whoever screams the loudest, right? Or it's whatever they tell me to do. It doesn't have anything to do with revenue. It doesn't have anything to do with cost savings, right? How do you make decisions about what data is more important than others? Well, we don't. We just follow gut or intuition. So what I saw was data leaders saying, "Do this. You out there need to be data driven, but here we're going to use intuition to prioritize. We're going to use gut to prioritize. We're not even going to try to quantify the business value of the data or the solutions that we implement, because that's really too hard. It's impossible. I hear that all the time." So I would see the situation where it's do what we say, but don't do what we do. If that's true, Dan, through the research you've been doing, what would the negative ramifications of that be?
Well,
first of all, do you agree with the assertion? And I said it in such a rhetorical way, you probably would be difficult to disagree. But like, what's your overall response? Now you can just respond. You don't even have to think. You can just
Okay.
respond.
Yeah. So my overall response is, okay, if we think about culture, like let's try and narrow in on what culture is a little bit, right? So if you think
Good.
about
Okay. Good.
big,
Good approach. Yeah.
let's think about some big buckets of things that influence culture. So one of them is beliefs, right? So from an organizational perspective, right, that could be, your vision, your mission statement, your values, right? I'd say that probably all organizations have those, either implicitly or explicitly. Another influence is organization. So roles, responsibilities, processes, um, how we communicate with each other. So what language do we use? So language of business, language of IT. What channels do we use to communicate? What's the structure of it? Do I have to go up the hierarchy chain of command, or is it more of a matrix type of communication? And then customs, and again, right, if I'm trying to think about that in terms of a business, your policies, your procedures, your ethics, right? I would say that most organizations have all of those things in place, either implicitly or explicitly,
Right. Agreed.
right? And yet we still say we don't have the culture that we want, because at the end of the day, culture is actually the collective behavior of individuals. That's what culture is, right? It's how do people behave as individuals, right? And then collectively, right, those individuals within an organization, that forms the culture. So we can put all of those things into place to influence culture, but at the end of the day, we still have to go back and understand, why aren't people adjusting to our new processes, right? Why aren't people adhering to our ethics and values, right? What's preventing them? What's preventing their behavior from changing? It all goes back to how the brain interprets threats. If we address how the brain interprets threats, then we're gonna move towards the culture that we want. Now, I see you're thinking about this. I'll give you a minute to think about this, and then I have another part to
My
follow on
theory,
that.
no, but my theory based on the previous rants is that, or my little mini rant, my theory is that people will be less likely, and maybe this is about leadership more than culture. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But my theory is that people will be far less likely to follow you if they think you talk out of two sides of your mouth. Right?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
If you hear,
Yeah,
if you say,
that's a trust issue, right?
right,
If you say one thing and then tomorrow you say something that's completely opposite,
or you say that data matters and that we want to use data to make,
right,
facts to make
right,
decisions, but then you don't use facts to make
right.
decisions, that to me, that's an integrity issue. But if I do believe that culture in many ways, or maybe I'm not using the right word, but if you have a leader that has those behaviors and is
Mm-hmm.
modeling those behaviors, you will have
Right.
a team that models those behaviors.
Sure.
And at some point, you will have a culture that no longer serves its purpose.
Right.
Okay.
Whatever leaders model is what employees use as
Right.
the basis for appropriate behavior,
Yeah.
right? And then the collective behavior of all those individuals creates your culture.
Okay. Okay. I'll give you something else that I think is a little problematic.
So can I
Go ahead, please.
follow up on one other thing?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the amygdala creates these threat responses, right? Which I talked about, but also because its whole job is to resolve uncertainty as quickly as possible, we get bias in decision making. So for example,
Mm,
I'm not going to use data, right? Because my experience tells me I should do this, right? And part of
Mhm.
that is because I'm trying to resolve the uncertainty as quickly as possible,
Which is a natural response.
which is a natural response, right? Which is what the amygdala wants to do. I want to resolve the uncertainty about this as quickly as possible. Well, I've got tons of experience and I've already done this and we should do this, right? Now, that experience is valuable, and I'm not saying that it's not, but you have to take time to step back and say, okay, what facts do we actually have, right? What data, what facts do we have, right? What assumptions are we making, right? Because I am making assumptions when I'm right. So this goes back to my post of my fab ass model of getting cognitive bias out of your decision making. Right? How
Are
are
you
we?
sure you were in product marketing? Just want to be sure. Just kidding.
Well,
Fab ass.
I tried to come up with an acronym that was badass, my badass
Oh,
framework. But
okay.
I had to go with like what was the
Fab
actual
ass.
things, right? Facts,
Fab ass.
assumptions, biases.
Okay. Okay.
So but I mean, you get my point, right?
Yes.
That the amygdala is also the source of all bias in humans, right? Cognitive, all kinds. It's the source, and everything else gets layered on top of that. So that gets pulled into our decision making, either experience bias or um, safety bias, right? We don't, you know, well, okay, I know, there used to be the old saying, I know if I go with IBM, I'm not going to get fired, right? Kind of thing, right? Whether the facts are that was the best solution or not, right? So that's where it also gets played out in the, I'm not using data to actually make decisions. And how do we go back, or how do we step back, right? And say, what are the facts? What assumptions are we making here? What are there facts that we're missing? How are we, what biases do we have, right? For example, I have a bias towards a particular outcome, right? When we're making a decision. So then I'm going to take all the facts that I have and I'm going to create a story and a narrative that support the biased outcome that I want, right? And so we need to look at all of those things and how we're making decisions, right? If we actually want to be more data driven, fact driven in our decision
So
making.
that sounds like a you know awareness, right?
Yes.
Self-awareness,
It
right?
all starts with awareness. Yes.
Yeah, that you as a data leader, if you are on the verge of making a decision based on intuition when you don't necessarily have to, ask yourself why. If the
Mm-hmm.
question is because if I don't answer this question in the next 15 minutes, I'm going to lose my status, or I'm going to lose relationships, or whatever, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
these things will be, you know, overwhelm me,
Right.
or produce undesirable outcomes, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That you need to kind of take a step back, maybe take a few deep breaths and ask yourself, okay, is this really the best path forward here? Which
Mm-hmm.
sounds kind of reasonable across the board.
That gets back to the very beginning. I'm a reasonable guy. See,
And we have come for circle. The circle of life is complete.
kumbaya.
It's just, I am fascinated by the issue of culture, because I just see behaviors that we need to desperately stop.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we just touched on something, awareness.
Yeah.
Obviously key, but I think that there are some things in our world that are just so deeply ingrained that we almost take as normal, as acceptable, and we don't even question them when we should question them. I'll give you an example. Imagine, and I'm going to use rhetoric here, and a story, because who doesn't like stories? Um, imagine if you worked at Frito-Lay and you were in the Doritos division, and you were in the business of making chips. Like you made chips, corn chips. And if you were sitting at the the monthly board meeting, or your executive meeting, or your
Mm-hmm.
KPI review, or your MBO review, whatever it is, and you
Right.
didn't hit your chip output number for the month, or your Yelp reviews about your chips were down, or whatever it is, doesn't
Yeah.
matter. Nobody likes the chips. And your answer to the board was, well, our corn sucks. It's garbage. Our corn is garbage. Like, imagine if you use that answer.
Mm-hmm.
We do that every day in the data world. We talk about our inputs as garbage. We literally use that word, garbage, over and over and over and over and over, to the point where it's part of the lexicon. It's a normal, acceptable part of the lexicon. And that's an example where it's like, well, wait a minute, hold on. Look at any other business, any other line of business, any other business that is involved in making or manufacturing or refining things, where they don't have control over their raw inputs, and they have to do their best with their raw inputs. Find one that considers those raw inputs garbage and constantly complains about them and says that I'm basically powerless to stop them, and it's them, it's not me. Like that, to me, that has to have some sort of input on our culture, but we don't even talk about it. We just accept that there is this idea of garbage and that it's somebody else's problem.
Yeah,
maybe it's rhetorical, and that's okay. And maybe
no,
maybe just
we do.
You don't have to agree, by the way.
No, well, with lots of people, right? Garbage in, garbage out. Like, that's part of the lexicon, right? I think part of the, okay, so I'm going to take a step back, and part of the reason that some of these things happen is because the brain is lazy. So the brain is about 2% of the body mass, but uses 20% of the energy. And the prefrontal cortex, which is the rational thinking part, is very resource intensive. And so the brain likes to create shortcuts, right? Like, oh, based on my experience, we do this, so that it preserves energy. And so a lot of these things that we do are a function of, I call it laziness. It's really resource
optimization.
Well, it's not even optimization. So it's keeping resources in reserve in case I need to fight or flight.
Oh, okay.
Because survival overtakes everything else. So when the amygdala feels threatened, right, like there's a survival issue, it actually pulls resources away from the prefrontal cortex, which is why you can't have
rational thought goes out the window.
You can't have a rational conversation with anybody, and then it dumps cortisol and adrenaline, right, in preparation for the fight or flight. So the brain is constantly looking for shortcuts, and so a lot of these things I think that happen that I think you're alluding to are a function of that, right? Where we're just taking mental shortcuts without taking the time to really think through what do all these things mean. Now, that doesn't specifically address your garbage, right? But we have to. I mean, I would just say, look, this is not garbage. This is a resource. And how are we best going to use this resource, right? And if somebody says we can't tie this to some business outcome, I just say bullshit. I'm sorry. Can I say that on your show?
Yes, of course. Sorry. Podcast. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I just call, like that's.
I don't know. I don't think we're going to get booted or anything. But yeah. No, we're fine. It's a technical term in the data world. We all know it. Yes.
Yeah. Like, that's your job, right? If you're a data leader, if you're a CDO, a CDAO, a CAO, a CAIO, whatever the new EIEIO is.
Sound like the childhood rhyme at a certain point about a farm.
Your whole job is to figure out how you use data and analytics to improve the business outcomes. right? Like, if you can't do that, like, you shouldn't be there. I'm sorry. Like, that's my perspective. Like, do your job, man.
Well, yeah, I think I agree. I I am optimistic though that with some changes in mindset, and really, I just kind of distill this down to this loosely defined notion of mindset.
Mm-hmm.
If you see everything as garbage, or if you see that garbage is overwhelming or uncontrollable,
Right.
or that is like it's like your kryptonite, right?
Right.
You're going to see it everywhere, even often where it doesn't even necessarily exist,
Right.
right? If that's kind of the mindset, um, people pick up on that, and
Mm-hmm.
people see it, particularly on the other side of the table, particularly in peers. Because
Sure.
if I'm the COO and I'm responsible for sales operations, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm responsible for moving sales quotes through all the way from the time it's a quote all the way through to the time revenue is recognized.
Right.
If that's what I'm responsible for, my reason for being, my
Mm-hmm.
existence is the optimization of that process.
Right.
Hard stop.
Yeah.
I've never met a business leader that wasn't, that's operationally focused, that wasn't focused on having the most efficient
Sure.
operations possible.
Yeah.
And if you're a data leader that is basically saying they don't know what they're doing, they're making my life hard, they don't care about data quality, right? If that's what you're saying over and over and over again, and your peers are hearing this,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of things that they're probably thinking about you that can't be repeated. But one of them most certainly is, then you don't have any clue what I do for a living.
Yeah.
Because what I do for a living is optimize business
Right.
processes. It's my job to make the supplier onboarding process as
Right.
fast and as efficient as possible, and within certain guidelines, right? Within time guidelines, within budget time, within risk guidelines, within all those things.
Right.
So I love this idea of culture. I love conversations about culture. I think we need, absolutely positively need more of it. I think we need more of it through your lens, which is kind of looking more the way we think,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think we also needed kind of through some of the lens that I'm talking about, which are kind of like mindset and leadership
Right.
and
Right.
modeling behaviors, and put all these things together. Because I think
They're all
those
interrelated. They're all
yeah,
interrelated, and they all play off each other, right? So I mean,
yeah,
that's the big. There's a lot of conversation right now around growth mindset, and like what does that really mean, right? And all that really means is an iterative process of getting better, right? The key word to a growth mindset is yet. The data's not clean yet,
yeah, yeah.
but I'm going to do this to move it there. The data's still not perfect yet, but now I'm going to do this to get us closer, right? Yet. Okay. As opposed to, well, it's all just garbage. And
Also,
I'm sure that there are some people. So I'm going to take a little different viewpoint here.
contrarian.
I'm sure that there are some people, data leaders, that maybe like have that, it's all garbage, but I think most of them, I don't think most of them are that way.
Or agreed, but that is a pervasive view. Like it is part of the lexicon, and it's
It
used
is
all the
part of the
time.
lexicon, and so I'm focusing on data leadership, right? And I
Yeah,
think that there's a bunch of people underneath the data leaders that probably have that view, right? And that's part of the data leader's responsibility, right? I need to help them change the mindset of like, we're not here in business, we're not getting paid to make data good. We're getting paid to deliver good data that's going to improve the business outcomes.
by design. Yeah.
Right. By design. Right. Like,
Well, and yeah, man,
I,
we could keep going. This is an area where I think we need a lot of help, and we need more fresh ideas, more new ideas. I think the more we can understand how people's minds work and how their brains
Mhm.
work, the better. because we certainly need injections of new and fresh and different ideas. Because this is another thing that I think we are way too focused on kind of the past, and I think there's a lot of aversion to change. In our space. Now, we like new technologies, but when it comes to actually changing the way that we do things, I think that we've got a bit of an uphill battle. So it's messages like yours, I think, that are important, and I think that help. And any way that a data leader can help make sure that people aren't triggered and have a fight or flight over change or over anything else that a data leader is doing, the better. That one was definitely my
Yeah, that one was your.
Yeah.
Or when somebody is triggered, like, don't try and have a rational conversation. Give them at least a half an hour to calm down.
I love it. Dan, we could keep going for hours and hours and hours.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on.
Well, thank you. I would invite everybody who is listening, please follow Dan on LinkedIn. He puts out fantastic content. Every now and then, it's even a little entertaining. Some of your lip syncs are epic on LinkedIn, but I like the deep think stuff. That's kind of what I tend to lean towards, and you put out a lot of that as well. So please, I would invite everybody to follow Dan Everett, the Techno Optimist, on LinkedIn. He puts out great content. If you're not already a subscriber to this podcast and you've made it this far in this episode, well, thank you. Please consider subscribing and turning on your notifications for new episodes of the podcast. I'm Malcolm Hawker, Head of Data Strategy with Prophecy, your host. Thank you so much for tuning in, Dan. Thank you.
My pleasure.
All right, everybody. We'll see you again in another 2 weeks in another installment of the CDO Matters podcast. Thanks all.